You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium. Available on Apple Podcast, Substack, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about what happened to Barry Sherman. So it's over to you now, Mark.
Bernard Charles Barry Sherman was a Canadian businessman and philanthropist, as well as the chairman and CEO of Apotex Inc., with, according to the American business magazine called Forbes, an estimated net worth of $3.2 billion at the time of his death. Barry Sherman, a University of Toronto graduate with a doctorate in engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, originally got his start in the pharmaceutical business in the 1960s when the estate of his uncle, Lewis Lloyd Winter, let him run Empire Laboratories, which belonged to the late uncle's drug company, eventually leading Barry Sherman to form his own company named Apotex, where he earned a reputation amongst both his competitors and government regulators for his extreme combativeness, which would often include litigation. In 1971, Barry Sherman married his wife, Honey, who would later rise to prominence in Canadian philanthropy, as well as her ending up serving on the boards of several prominent charities. However, in late 2017, the couple were both found dead in their home, with the investigators from the Toronto Police Department initially considering their deaths as a murder-suicide, although this was later revised to a homicide after further investigation and disputes from the media. In the April of 2019, the police said they had a working theory of the case, along with a good idea of what had actually happened. But as of the May of 2022, the investigation was still active and ongoing, and no suspects or persons of interest having ever been named since the murder occurred. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this unsolved episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I am a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who realised the other day that the reason why Han Solo did not enjoy his steak dinner was because it was chewy. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Friday night, though occasionally on a Wednesday allowing for bank holidays and busy weeks, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, the darker side of some past celebrities, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of the episode subject that I can reply to, a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. Or if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again give us a like and a follow. And if you do get a few minutes, perhaps you might like to check out my social media groups and pages, including Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, which are filled daily with all things unexplained and crime. I'll put the links to some of my socials in the description. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the misadventurous story surrounding what happened to Barry Sherman, and this week's necessary disclaimer. Well, this story is a tale that sadly involves a possible homicide and a touch of racism near the end of the show, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, I found out just last week that the trouble with getting to work on time is that it makes the day so damn long. But anyway, let us get back to the story. So, the first question we ask ourselves is, who was Barry Sherman? Well, according to Wikipedia, Barry Sherman was born on the 25th of February in 1942 into a Jewish family in Toronto to his father, Herbert Dick Hyman Sherman, who was a business partner for a zipper company, and his mother, Sarah Sherman, who was an occupational therapist. His grandparents from both sides of his family had originally fled the persecution of Jews in Russia and Poland, and that he was just 10 years old when his father had died from a heart attack. He won a national physics contest while attending the Forest Hill Collegiate Institute? Collegiate Institute, graduated with top marks. And in the summer of 1958, he signed up for a Canadian Army organised student militia, but found out that he didn't like submitting to authority. And let's face it, who does? In the same year, he entered the University of Toronto's U of T Engineering Science programme, with, at the age of 16, him being one of the youngest students ever to join, claiming later that the reason he chose that programme specifically was because it was reputedly the university's hardest curriculum. During the summer months, Barry Sherman worked for his uncle, Louis Lloyd Winter, at Winter's company Empire Laboratories, which was at that time Canada's largest owned pharmaceutical business, working as a driver, primarily picking up urine samples for pregnancy tests. And when his uncle was away travelling, Barry Sherman would often help by watching over the operations. In 1964, Barry Sherman graduated from the University of Toronto's U of T Engineering Science programme with the highest honours in his class and received the university's Governor-General's Award for his thesis, and then he enrolled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, from which he received a PhD in astrophysics in 1967. In 1967, after completing his PhD, Barry Sherman then purchased the aforementioned Empire Laboratories from the executor of the estate of Louis Lloyd Winter and his wife Beverly, as the couple had died just 17 days apart in the November of 1965, leaving 4 orphaned young children. Empire Laboratories had been the first company to secure the compulsory rights to manufacture Hoffmann-La Roche's Valium or diazepam in Canada, and was one of the country's largest manufacturers of Pfizer's Vibrancin or doxycycline, Upjohn Company's Urinase or tolbutamide, and the dietary sweetener known as saccharin. I don't know why they just don't call these things so much easier names. I really don't. Anyway, Barry Sherman also personally invested in other non-pharmaceutical businesses, and for 15 years he partnered with Frank D'Angelo, who was a fruit juice maker trying to branch out into other projects, with the two producing the Cheetah Power Surge energy drink, along with starting up the Steelback Brewery. However, when Frank D'Angelo's brands went bankrupt in 2007, Barry Sherman lost 100 million Canadian dollars. But despite this setback, Sherman did continue to back D'Angelo's filmmaking venture, even after he was arrested on sexual assault and obstruction of justice charges, which, I must stress, were later dropped in 2009. In the late 2010s, Barry Sherman worked with another man who was later convicted of fraud, named Sean Rutenberg. The two had been introduced by a mutual friend, the Cineplex Odeon co-founder Myron Gottlieb, who had met Sean Rutenberg in prison following his conviction for fraud in the collapse of Livent, which was the Live Entertainment Corporation of Canada. Sean Rutenberg managed to persuade Barry Sherman to invest in his development of an online trivia game, which ended up with Sherman later filing a lawsuit against Sean Rutenberg, alleging that the latter had simply pocketed the money. Back to 1971, and Barry Sherman marries Honey Reach, who was not only of Austrian nationality, but was also a fellow student of the University of Toronto and a daughter of Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors, with the couple going on to have 4 children, a son named Jonathan and 3 daughters named Lauren, Alexandra and Kaylin. And while Barry Sherman socialised regularly with his wife Honey, he was also known to his friends and family as a workaholic, and although at the social events that they attended Honey was more outgoing, Barry would often keep to himself, mainly discussing his business. Other forms of recreation that the Sherman family would often take up would be frequent visits to a ski club on winter weekends, but while Honey and the children availed themselves of the facilities, Barry would often remain in the lodge poring over documents, and during many of their vacations he would spend most of his time reviewing business materials. Even as Barry Sherman's fortune grew, he would drive his cars until they reached an advanced state of disrepair, with one friend worrying that one particular car of his, a Ford Mustang, was so decrepit that it was leaking carbon monoxide into the passenger's compartment. And for his 50th birthday, his wife, Honey, gave him a red sports car with a big bow on top of it in front of an assembled guests. However, upon seeing the gift, he asked her to take it back, which she did. Some people just don't know they're spoiled, do they? Anyway, after this first short break in part 2, we will look at the death of Barry Sherman and his wife Honey, along with the start of an investigation.
Ghost Planet Network, broadcasting from the other side. Ready to tune into terror? The Ghost Planet Network is your new home for original paranormal content, streaming straight from beyond the veil. We have got it all: spine-tingling stories, chilling documentaries, and real paranormal investigations from the world's most haunted hotspots. Perfect for believers, skeptics, and anyone who loves a good scare. Join the Paranormal TV revolution. Get unlimited access for just £12 per year. Tune in now or email us at neil.hapra@gmail.com to sign up. That's neilhapprc@gmail.com.
In 2017, the Shermans decided to sell their long-time home on Old Colony Road in North York and move to a house that they were building in Forest Hill, closer to downtown Toronto, where many of their friends and business associates lived. Honey Sherman, who according to reports had initiated the move, had purchased a corner lot in the November of 2016 with plans to demolish the existing house on the site. They put the North York home on the market with an asking price of almost $7 million at the end of the November in 2017, even though the construction had not yet started on their Forest Hill house. On the 12th of December, again in 2017, Honey Sherman missed a meeting of the Baycrest Centre Foundation board without actually notifying them beforehand, which, according to her friends and colleagues, was somewhat unusual for her. And when she was eventually contacted by email, she simply replied with a message, and I quote,
"Dealing with some stuff."
The next day, late in the afternoon, on the 13th of December, the Shermans met in Barry's office at the Apotex headquarters, where they went over some design changes to the new house in Forest Hill. Honey was planning to leave shortly for a holiday vacation in Miami, and Barry was to join her a week later. However, it was the last time that the couple was seen alive. Later that same evening, after he returned home, Barry Sherman then sent his Apotex staff a routine email about a drug the company was developing. However, he did not call anyone during that night, which, according to his staff, was very unusual because he frequently suffered from insomnia. The next day, on the 14th of December, Barry Sherman did not show up at the Apotex headquarters, which, again, according to his staff, was very much out of the ordinary for him. The next morning, on the 15th of December, neither Barry nor Honey Sherman were expected to be at home. The cleaning staff had already let themselves in with a recently installed lockbox when a pair of real estate agents arrived at the house at around mid-morning with a couple who were interested in purchasing the property. And after showing the couple around the main story of the home, the agents then took the potential buyers downstairs to the lap pool and hot tub. However, when they got there, they discovered both Barry and Honey's bodies were on the floor next to the pool, and both of their necks were tied with leather belts to a metal railing, which was slightly over a metre high around the pool. But not only that, it appeared that Barry was seated with his legs crossed on the pool deck, while Honey was on her side with a bruise on her face. Their coats were pulled down over their shoulders, restraining their arms, and they were facing away from the water, still fully clothed. It was also reported, mainly by the Toronto Star, that Honey Sherman's cell phone was found in the bathroom, which was kind of odd because, according to her friends, she never used it, suggesting to investigators that she may have gone there in an attempt to summon help, but was overpowered in the process. And not only that, but Barry Sherman's gloves, as well as paperwork related to an inspection of the house, were left on the floor just outside the garage door on the way to the basement pool. A window had been left open to allow a recently painted room to air out, and a basement door was left unlocked, which apparently is how the Shermans would frequently leave it, causing the police to come to a rough conclusion that maybe someone knew about this unlocked door, as well as the general interior of the house layout, and so they may have been able to escape through it and disappear through a neighbouring backyard after the crime was committed. Upon seeing the ugly scene of Barry and Honey Sherman's lifeless bodies, bodies downstairs in the lap pool and hot tub area. The police were then called onto the scene, with the deaths being treated as suspicious, and because they were the most experienced in dealing with sudden unexpected deaths, the Toronto Police Service Homicide Squad took the lead in the investigation. A post-mortem examination showed the cause of both the deaths of the Shermans was down to, and I quote,
a ligature neck compression,
which, in layman's terms, is a ligature strangulation caused by binding or tying, and is usually distinguished from a hanging by the strangling force being something other than the person's own body weight. The Toronto Police Service had previously told the news media that there was no indication of any forced entry into the Sherman home, and that their investigation did not include a search for any suspects. And although there wasn't any note left by the deceased, law enforcement sources told the Toronto Star on the 15th or 16th of December in 2017 that they were, and I quote, probing the possibility that they were a murder-suicide. However, due to Honey Sherman suffering face injuries whilst Barry did not, this also fueled initial police speculation that, out of the two victims, she may have been the intended target. During the investigation, some anonymous sources noted that the Sherman's house had several entrances, and that it was indeed possible for either or both Barry and Honey to have let someone in who was asking for help. The Sherman children issued a statement urging the Toronto Police Service Homicide Squad to conduct a thorough criminal investigation and chastised law enforcement for leaking the murder-suicide theory. And not only that, but they also contacted a Toronto lawyer named Brian Greenspan to retain a private investigator to look into their parents' deaths, who in turn hired Tom Klett, who was a retired Toronto police detective who had worked in the homicide, drug and intelligence bureaus. The family also hired Dr. David Kaysen, who was the retired chief forensic pathologist for Ontario, to conduct a second autopsy, which concluded that the couple's cause of death was indeed a homicide. In the early January of 2018, when contacted by a reporter, a Toronto police spokesman reiterated the position that they were treating the Sherman's deaths as suspicious, and on the 26th of January that same year, the Toronto police advised the news media that their investigation concluded that the couple had been killed in a targeted attack. However, even though they would not discuss any possible suspects, they planned to interview everyone who had access to the home prior to the deaths via the lockbox that was previously installed by the real estate agents. However, as it transpires, the police investigation did encounter resistance at the Apotex headquarters, which, if you remember, was the company that was owned by Barry Sherman himself, with a police spokesman saying at the time, and I quote, "Legal complexities in some executions have been challenging given the litigious nature of Barry Sherman's businesses. In particular, the search and the seizure of electronics in Barry Sherman's workspace at Apotex." By the end of October in 2018, the aforementioned lawyer, Brian Greenspan, announced that the Sherman family had offered a $10 million reward in the couple's homicide investigation for any information that leads to the arrest and prosecution of a suspect. And at the same time, the lawyer also complained about the police investigation by claiming that it had failed to collect important evidence. But in their defence, the police chief Mark Saunders told the news media that not only was a forensic pathologist working on the case, but an additional 50 officers were interviewing 200 witnesses and collecting over 2,000 hours of video surveillance from the neighbouring homes. And when he was asked if the police would be willing to work with the independent experts to be convened by the lawyer Brian Greenspan, the police chief Mark Saunders said he would if the group were to be accepted in a court proceeding. By the end of 2019, the private investigators who were working on the Sherman family closed their investigation, and in the April of 2022, the Toronto police said the case was, and I quote, "unfortunately old, and still in the investigation phase, with no charges having been filed against anyone." So the Toronto police asked the court to seal any case documents from the press to protect the integrity of the investigation. And in the December of 2022, Barry and Honey Sherman's son increased the reward to $35 million. After this second short break, in part 3 we will look at the possible suspects and motives, along with where the property and legacy of the incident stands today.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. Or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
There's been a lot of speculation over the last few years about who might have been responsible for the murders of both Barry and Honey Sherman, particularly given that Barry Sherman's many business associates had criminal records and had been angered by some of his actions and decisions. But not only that, Barry Sherman himself had acknowledged that an attempt could be made on his life, saying that, and I quote, "For $1,000 paid to the right person, you could probably get someone killed." And he told the American journalist Jeffrey Robinson in an interview for his book in the late 1990s that, and again I quote, "Perhaps I'm surprised that that hasn't happened." 2 weeks before the murders, Barry Sherman had asked his son, Jonathan Sherman, to repay him tens of millions of dollars that Jonathan had borrowed for his storage business. Jonathan explained that this was to help get his father through a difficult financial situation, with his father in turn committing to future funding when his own finances improved. I feel I should point out here that the relationship between Barry Sherman and his son, Jonathan, was very close, both personally and professionally. In the November of 2020, the Toronto police said that they had identified a person of interest. Then later that same month, they clarified that it could be either just one person or a multitude of people. Nothing like narrowing it down, eh guys? Anyway, approximately a year later, on the 14th of December in 2021, the Toronto police released security camera footage of a suspect in a roughly 20-second video of a person dressed in dark clothing that can be seen walking down a sidewalk on a snow-covered night in the neighbourhood, with the detective named Brandon Price telling reporters, and I quote, "The timing of this individual's appearance is in line with when we believe the murders took place," adding that, and again I quote, "Based on this evidence we are classifying this individual as a suspect." According to documents released by the court in the January of 2022, leading up to his death, Barry Sherman owed a total of $1 billion to various other companies, which he said he was not going to pay. And let's be honest here, if nothing else, it would certainly make some people feel a little miffed. And furthermore, the court documents also revealed that the estate of the Shermans was somehow part of the murder investigation. Also mentioned in the court documents as possibly having a motive to kill Barry Sherman is the aforementioned fruit juice maker Frank D'Angelo, given the long 15-year history between the two men and the latter's man-checkered past. In an interview with Bloomberg, Frank D'Angelo said, and I quote, "The worst thing that could have happened to me is Barry dying," also expressing regret that he had not been able to save a man he regarded as a close friend, believing that, and again I quote, "Somebody came to make Barry an offer he couldn't refuse, and he refused." Another set of court documents, again released in the January of 2022, included statements that were made by Honey Sherman's sister, named Mary Shetman, who suggested that the person who was responsible for the murders of her sister and brother-in-law were, and I quote,
making a statement,
believing that the motive for the killings may have been down to religion, adding, and again I quote,
"The Shermans were strong supporters of Israel, and Honey was very vocal about being Jewish. There were a lot of people of a certain ethnicity going through the house at a certain time, and Honey would use phrases that were not politically correct."
Mary Shetman also said that 6 months before the murders, Honey had gone to a lecture. She continues, and I quote,
"About stopping money from getting into Muslim fundamentalists' hands. And in a statement to the police, Mary Shetman said that Honey's belief was that, and I quote, if the money were to be cut off from the Muslims fundamentalists, they could bankrupt them, and therefore the money could not be used for terror."
With Mary Shetman also telling the police that she believed, and yet again I quote,
"Barry was providing funding for this."
Going back a couple of years, and in the June of 2019, people who were close to the Shermans said that Barry had planned to give much of his fortune to charity, and approximately a year later, in 2020, his daughter, Alex Krosek, established the Honey and Barry Sherman Legacy Foundation in order to honour her parents' memory. Alex Krosek is now a registered nurse and philanthropist who leads two charitable foundations, the Krosek Family Foundation and the aforementioned Honey and Barry Sherman Legacy Foundation. And in 2023, Jonathan Sherman, who, if you remember, was the only son of the Sherman couple, announced that he was donating $52 million to the Toronto Jewish community so it can build the Honey and Barry Memorial Arena on the grounds of an existing Jewish community campus in Vaughan, Ontario, with it also consisting of 2 NHL-sized hockey rinks and supporting facilities. The house where the Barry and Honey Sherman murders took place was demolished and the address was changed in the May of 2019. The land was then purchased in 2020 by a young woman who lived nearby and, according to reports, put it on the market in 2023 at a significantly inflated price tag.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 191, we are going to be looking at the Doris Biffer case. The Doris Biffer case, which is also known as the entity haunting, was a 1974 investigation into alleged paranormal phenomena in Culver City, California, experienced by a woman named Doris Biffer. The case inspired Frank de Felita's 1978 book, The Entity, which was made into a 1982 film of the same name, starring Barbara Hershey. Doris Biffer alleged that she was being attacked and assaulted by either one or several invisible entities.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations of all the names and places, though, was all mine. The voices in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And, of course, a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you do know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember, guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. No AI was used or harmed in the making of this or any other episode of Mark's Unexplained World. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.